Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Global Accessibility Awareness Day webinar. My name is Curtis Flood. I'm from the Central Services Division of the University Library. I'll be driving this morning's session. I'm being supported by two of my library colleagues, Tess Ridgway and William Pidgeon, and we'd like to thank you all for joining us and welcome. Before we get started, we're just waiting on our attendee numbers to slowly filter through. Unfortunately, it does take a while. So while that's happening in the background, I just want to quickly run through a few things. First of all, yes, this session is being recorded. The video will be uploaded to the library's YouTube channel at a later date. Secondly, the closed captions have been enabled, so if you require closed captions, please use the closed captions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And lastly, we will also have a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. So if you'd like to submit a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll get to those questions at the end of all the presentations. Okay, so our numbers are looking fairly stable at the moment. So to get things underway officially, I'm going to hand over to Brett Stanford, who is the Manager of the Quality and Compliance here at the library. So Brett, it's over to you.
Hi, and thanks, Curtis, for that introduction. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Special presentation, A Screen at the Table. This is in recognition of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which is celebrated on May 18th. And on May 18th, we were able to announce that we'll be able to do this presentation. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for everybody who has helped put it together. I'd like to just take a moment to acknowledge the pay respects and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging on the land which I am on at the moment. I'm home on Darawal country. We respect and honour Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, past, present, and future, and acknowledge their stories, traditions, and living cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on this land. And the Darawal nation of in the Illawarra is a lovely, beautiful piece of Australia. If anybody has been down there, I'm sure they will agree. And my own personal thoughts that if I could just share with you here, is that I feel blessed every day to be able to live on such a just a gorgeous bit of land, and so I give my thanks in particular. Okay, if we'd like to get started. First, we have today a panel of three experts. I know they're not comfortable with that term, but I'd like to introduce Rosie. And Rosie, and for the panelists, and because I don't have such an extensive relationship with anybody today, I feel very lucky getting to meet them and listening to them. But I asked them, I thought it might be fun and perhaps a little bit more genuine for them to write an introduction themselves that I could share with you, have a bit of fun with it. And what their panelists, Rosie, Niko, and Damien, aren't aware, I also asked a colleague and another amazing person in the Disability at Work Network, Vicky-Anne Winfield, who I'm sure many of you may know. I asked her to also provide what she would write as what she would use as an introduction to each of them. So Vicky wrote for Rosie, while pursuing her studies, Rosie has also been making waves as a disability advocate and has gained widespread respect for her expertise on lived experience and disability inclusion. As a student representative on the DIAP, Rosie's transformative ideas are shaping the way the university thinks and acts about disability. Rosie wrote, Rosie is both a realist and a dreamer, which is why she decided to study postgraduate physiotherapy despite really wanting to pursue a career in poetry. Half of her personality is having purple hair, and the other half collects tattoos. She's a proud country kid, originally from Geraldton in regional Midwest, Western Australia, land of the Southern Yamatji, peoples. Rosie joined the university's Disability Inclusion and Action Implementation Group last year as one of the 3 inaugural student representatives, where she provides feedback on projects and initiatives and advocates for other disabled students. So Rosie, over to you for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Brett, for that. I am on Gadigal land today, and I grew up on the land of the Yamatji peoples, Southern Yamatji peoples. So yeah, today I'm on Gadigal land for Mabo Day. And yeah, I sort of decided that probably one of the best ways I can explain how accessible learning has helped me is through memes, because who doesn't love a good meme? So yeah, I'm still studying, so I'm going to be speaking about my experiences of how Zoom has made my learning experience more accessible, and how it can make other university activities more accessible as well. And I suppose I should start by saying that I know that there are kind of pros and cons to Zoom, and that there are lots of mixed feelings about learning and teaching via Zoom, and that it's not, you know, always helpful or straightforward. And we all became pretty familiar with the pros and cons of that through COVID. But yeah, I'm going to talk about how it helped me as a disabled student, and yeah, while I've been studying. So like as a brief example, I really appreciate chat as a feature because I have a lot of thoughts in my head all the time, and I also ask a lot of questions, so it's really helpful for me to have that. So yeah, if you could go to the next slide, please, Will, I can yeah, talk about why I value accessible learning through a assortment of memes. So yeah, so some of the reasons why I think Zoom is really helpful is that you kind of have the option if you want to have a camera on and off, right? Which seems really simple, I suppose, but for someone who struggles to control their emotions and how they like their facial expressions, I got to teach my facial expressions to use their inside voice. Is that first meme? Yeah, I guess it's sort of like a way that I can feel more comfortable in myself and not have to worry about masking, I suppose. And if anyone doesn't know what masking is, it's sort of the practice of, I guess I would call it like pretending to appear more normal or more neurotypical. And I find for myself, having to mask my emotions and my facial expressions is really, really exhausting and really draining. And I suppose that by, yeah, being able to have my camera off on Zoom is a way that I can overcome that and not have to worry so much about, you know, am I making like a bad face because I disagree with this argument or something like that? Because I know that that's, you know, unhelpful for other people as well. So yeah, I got to teach my facial expressions, my inside voice. Next, we have me, or it's not me, but, you know, spraying Nutella on a phone as a good example of trying to do anything while dissociating. So I experienced dissociation and dissociative episodes, I suppose you might want to call them. And this can, I suppose, make it hard for me to like not only pay attention and absorb content during like a lecture, things like that, but I suppose it also in an in-person lecture, it can almost make it seem like I'm not paying attention, or, you know, people might think I'm staring at them. And I suppose that creates a whole lot of other anxiety after the fact. You know, if people are sort of like, you know, why were you staring at me the whole time? And I guess it's like, well, I wasn't necessarily looking at you, as bad as it sounds. I was probably looking through you, and I probably didn't even realize that that's where my eye contact was focused. So I guess it's sort of like, it really just, I suppose, learning via Zoom just really gives me the freedom to not have to worry about, you know, what I'm doing and what I look like or things like that, because it's just exhausting to have to mask all the time when you're, you know, learning face-to-face, teaching face-to-face as well. And yeah, finally, I got all this panic and not one invitation to the disco. As someone who experiences panic attacks that can be quite debilitating, it can be really, really difficult to find a safe space on campus to sort of let that dissipate and deal with that in a way that is helpful to me. And I suppose if I was to be learning on campus, well, as I am right now, I often will have to, you know, leave a tute or a lecture, and I might have to do that several times. And I guess if it's not being recorded, or it's not being recorded synchronously, like with Zoom, it can, it can sort of disrupt my learning a bit as well. Whereas I suppose Zoom is a bit, the recording has the, wow, this sentence was a real loop. I'm so sorry for that. Yeah. How about we're just going to park that one. So yeah, learning via Zoom is a way that I can have panic attacks, and I'm in a safe environment where I can bring that down more easily because I'm in my own space, right? And I find that much easier. And then I suppose a few other things that came to mind when I was asked to speak about this is sometimes the hardest part of my day is getting to campus. Public transport is particularly exhausting for me. And I suppose as someone who might not look disabled, and I am using air quotes because I think that whole prerogative is really awful in and of itself, but as someone who doesn't, look disabled, it can be really difficult to come up with the courage to, say, hey, I really need to sit down. Can I have this seat? Because I suppose people, I've never had anyone stand up for me when I've gotten on a bus or train, but there are times when I really do need to sit down. And I guess that there are probably a lot of other disabled people that can relate to that as well. So yeah, I suppose when I'm learning via Zoom, it's like, I don't have to use the energy that I could be putting into learning and studying just to get to the lecture. And that is really, really important to me because if I don't have the energy to leave the house or I don't have the energy to get to campus, then it's great that I can still learn, in real time and live and all those sorts of things. Yeah, so they're the main things. I suppose one other one that is, this is my last sort of point, I suppose, that explains why Zoom makes university a bit more inclusive for me. I do have tics, and my tics get particularly bad when my anxiety is bad. And it's also, if people point out my tics, I get more anxious about them. If people see me ticking, I get more anxious about them. And the more anxious I get, the more I tick. And sometimes they're really funny, but sometimes they're quite rude or, quite personal. And I guess as bad as it sounds, it's nice that I don't disrupt other people when I am not on campus because I'm aware that not everyone understands tics or like fidgeting, things like that, and that they might think that, yeah, I can control it or it's just an excuse or things like that. And I think that it's really great that learning online, I can tick freely and I can fidget freely without the increased anxiety of other people watching me, and also without disrupting others, because I guess I'm conscious of that too, even though that shouldn't be my prerogative, right? But kind of necessarily is, I suppose. So I guess to wrap up, before I pass on to the next presenter, I think that having the option of learning or teaching via Zoom is really important because, like I said at the beginning, there are obviously pros and cons. I think that the difference that I think, oh, sorry, how about we just erase that one too? Wow. The difference for me between learning via Zoom and having the option to learn via Zoom or only having the option to learn in person is that Zoom is synchronous. It's real time. You can normally see the lecturer and then normally screen sharing. So it's more, I kind of see it as like a bit of a, I guess segue is not the right word, but it's sort of an in-between between learning on campus in person and only having the voice recording or the sound recording to go over the slides and learning via just a recorded lecture without the video of the lecturer, because I think that's really important too. And I think it's really great to be able to see the lecturer or tutor as they're teaching. So yeah, I really like the sort of in-between nature of Zoom and that I can, see the lecturer and I can also, turn my camera off if I need to. It's less, I feel less anxious. I don't have to worry about controlling my facial expressions or needing my facial expressions to use that inside voice and things like that. So yeah, that is a bit about why I find Zoom more accessible and more inclusive as a disabled student. And that is it.
Rosie, thank you for sharing that. That was very personal and very touching, and I think I really respect you. From the moment, though, I think that you obviously have these things that you're aware of, and worry about how others perceive them. But I think from the moment I met you, I thought that you were a blessing, and I'm really glad that you find Zoom allows you to work from your safe space. Because I think that the best thing for us moving forward in this sort of difficult global environment as a business is to be able to unlock the full potential of the people that we employ, and our students as well. And so by sort of confining them to restrictive practices, arbitrary in some cases, rather than giving them the freedom to do their best, to be their best possible selves, is just bad business. So I'm really glad that that works for you, and I think a lot of other people will find the same thing. One particular thing you said about the chat, loving the chat function, is when I was, might have been like last year, earlier in last year, and I was chairing the Library's Disability Inclusion Action Planning Group, as I so frequently do, but I wasn't. It was a Teams meeting, and I wasn't monitoring very well the chat in the Teams. I was trying to monitor the agenda and talk to people. But a couple of the members were using the chat and liked using the chat, and were able to communicate more effectively there with their camera off when they were not feeling up to a face-to-face discussion. And they had really valid points to include into the discussion, but because I wasn't monitoring it, their voice was left out. And so we made some significant changes, and I'm really grateful that that's something that you've talked about. It is very important. I think keep it up. That's great. Thank you very much, Rosie. Great work. Thanks everybody for sticking with us. We're going to move on to Niko. He's our next presenter. Niko, remember, this is the bio that he wrote for me, and I'll share one that Vicky wrote first. Niko has been with USyd since 2007 and is a senior lecturer at the School of Psychology. His main research interests are in the areas of personality and personality disorders, mental health, and cross-cultural psychological elements of religion and spirituality. His main personal interests are poetry, science fiction, art. He's a Trekkie since birth. I don't know how that actually happens. I guess forced upon being a Trekkie, but then took on the Trekkie culture. Yep. Bebop jazz. I don't know if I've ever heard that. And existential or moral philosophy. He's a long-standing member of the university's Human Research Ethics Committee. Thank you. And important. And it represents the Disability at Work network. On the Psychology's Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And Vicky would introduce you by saying, as a long-standing member of the Disability at Work network, Niko has demonstrated an unwavering commitment to equality and inclusion. He has consistently welcomed and supported staff with disabilities to the university and made our community a warm and inviting place for everybody. I think that's all. So without further ado, Niko, over to you to share your experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett, and thank you, Vicky, for your kind words and embarrassing me. By the way, I have been a Trekkie since birth because my mom used to watch Star Trek when I was, still in her womb. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for being present to this event. I am dialing from the land of the Bedegal people, and I also would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of this land and to elders past, present, and emerging. And I also would like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today. So allow me to give you a brief account of my personal experience with online teaching and disability. Next slide, please. It took me a while to understand this cartoon. And by that, I don't mean cognitively understand. Cognitively, I suppose everyone understands it. I mean, existentially, holistically, fathom it. And for that to happen, I had to go through a journey, a personal journey. Second slide, please. So I love teaching. I really do love teaching. If I didn't, I wouldn't be in academia. All of my friends who love research have moved to research institutions or research organizations, get double my salary, and they have the weekends off. But I love teaching. It's these moments of epiphany that you see in your students that are marvelous. You know, this the knowledge that some of these will become future educators and correct you, make things better, move things forward. It's so rewarding. And through my 28-ish years of teaching, I've went through some variations of mode of enhancement, of teaching enhancement. I remember when I started, it was just blackboard and chalk. And if anyone remembers those days, you should remember, you know, the tricks chalk did to your skin at the end of the day, and also the squeal of the chalk as it was skipping through the board, and the grimmer film. Then we moved to whiteboard and markers. Improvement, although I still remember the dread of accidentally using a permanent marker and going, that was there before I arrived, or that was just me maybe. Then we moved to projectors and the acetates, and now we had light projected and magnification. By the way, this picture is not, I couldn't find a picture of me delivering a lecture with a projector, so I just got a random one from the internet. But then students didn't bring their phones to the lectures because they were connected to cords. And then, you know, we moved to overhead projectors and the big projections and PowerPoint. And I was looking forward to what is the next enhancement, I embrace change as long as it's progressive. Of course, now we can debate what is progressive, but I would say something that accommodates, something that enriches, something that expands practices, attitudes of the present into a better future. And then, as I was thinking about what's next, you see, John Lennon put it right when he said, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. And my next came with an unthinkable, fateful calamity. I died twice. Next slide, please. The medical staff at RPA put some Herculean efforts to save me, and they did, unless this is the afterlife. They did save me. I owe them my life. I was subjected to multiple surgeries and medical operations, all of which failed. And I ended up being diagnosed with a permanent disability. And I found myself locked in some sort of ineluctable prison, if you wish. And even though it was, and it felt so grim, I still wanted to teach from the hospital. I asked the university, can I still teach? My brain is working, can I teach? Mind you, that didn't make sense. I was on sick leave, but it wasn't possible either. And then COVID happened. And we zoomed in, or I suppose teamed up. Next slide, please. And although I was still, my bet was on augmented reality as the next step in this communication. Well, Zoom happened. Okay. We had to get used to it, how to use it. It was a steep learning curve, but it was exciting. It was exciting because of the opportunities, because of what it could allow us to do. Now, I embraced it once again. You know, I went full on. Next slide, please. So, through my experience, whatever it was for how long we used Zoom, 2 years, 2.5 years. These are the things I noticed as benefits when it comes to disability only. There are other benefits that are not exclusive to or of direct relevance to disability, but now I'm focusing on disability alone. And these benefits, mind you, apply to both academics and students. Rosie covered nicely some of those in more detail. Here, I'm just citing them. So for me, the most important that happened directly because of my disability, if you wish, is that it protects highly vulnerable people from infection. Infections that can be very serious, life-threatening to them. It accommodates people with auditory or visual impairments because, you know, now you have closed captions, and there are also add-on software that can help people with visual impairments. It helps people that with muteness or speech disorders because now they can type, you know, they can type their questions if you wish. And mind you, when moving to academics with such issues, although this didn't happen, but I have seen it demonstrated. I have seen it demonstrated that such academics can actually have type their lectures and have them through an AI being delivered verbally on their behalf. Mobility, well, exactly. Rosie covered that. Mobility issues, you know, having to come to the university, and if you are, say, a wheelchair user, the arduous journey to get there for an hour's lecture and again go back. Psychosocial factors, social anxiety, again mentioned, you know, fear of being judged, agoraphobia, fear of being in public places, all of those are practically eliminated. And the indirect thing that I noticed benefit is to people who are carers themselves of others with disability, and they don't have to leave them to go to the lectures, attend the lectures and come back. Indirect benefit, if you wish. Next slide, please. Now, the university has made declarations and commitments on its webpage. You can see things like the Disability Inclusion Action Plan that was introduced in 2018. As you can see there, careers for people with disability, commitment to accessibility. You can type all those. I have the links, but you can type all those, any of those keywords, and Sydney University, and it will take you straight to the web pages, and you can read more in detail there. Now, I have yet to see an affirmative action from the university when it comes to the subject we are addressing today. I do hope, nay, I pray that just like I adapted to my existence to accommodate my disability, the University of Sydney will adapt its pedagogical practices to inclusively and respectfully accommodate the needs of disability. And that's all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, so not to be flippant, but Trekkie from birth and also through death 2 occasions. Well done, it's pretty special. That was really powerful. Thank you. I didn't expect, obviously, such a dramatic turn of events. But even beyond that, the key messages on the changes that were brought out of the pandemic that obviously allowed us to continue to operate day in, day out, while most of us were unable to actually attend on site. But the one that resonated with me was the infection control as well. So that it gave, it gave you an opportunity, obviously, to continue work and to be safe from a pandemic, which could have potentially put you right back in hospital at the end of not meeting the afterlife. So I'm going to say I've never met anybody that's died twice, and you're just amazing. And I think that if I could be so bold as to suggest that the obvious love for teaching that you have, I imagine that the students that have been lucky enough to learn from you probably took a lot more from you than other teachers that perhaps been calling. So yeah, it's inspiring, definitely. Thank you so much. That was great. Okay, next we're going to meet Damien, but full disclosure, Damien isn't here with us or won't be delivering live. Damien as an accommodation for his own disability, pre-recorded his video. And so he won't actually, if you do have any questions, I remind everybody, if you do have any questions to Rosie or Niko about the presentation so far, or in general, related to a screen at the table and the hybrid meetings providing improved accessibility, please use the Q&A function and we'll go through the questions and answers after. If you have any questions that arise out of watching Damien's video shortly, we will be, with the recording, we'll go through and make sure the closed captions are accurate, and then we'll upload the recording on the library's YouTube channel. And at that time, I will socialise the recording, the access to the link, and we'll make sure that the questions that don't get answered or questions that you have for Damien's kindly offered to answer those questions in written form, and so we'll make them available. So if you have any questions, just feel free to ask them, even if they might not be able to answer straight away. Okay, so sticking with the traditional format, I like consistency. Damien is described by Vicky as a researcher at the Centre for Disability Policy and Research. Damien has a wealth of knowledge and expertise in disability lived experience research. Damien is an established expert of neurodivergency. His research encourages our community to embrace innovation and strive for equality. Great stuff. Damien's own thoughts on his introduction go like this. I would like now to introduce Damien Mellifont, who is a lived experience researcher at the Centre for Disability Research and Policy. In his pre-recorded video as an accommodation for his neurodivergence, Damien will firstly discuss what the pandemic has meant for him in terms of accessibility. Damien will then address two key questions. The first being, how can we make decisions when not everyone is in the room? And second, what is the difference between Zoom gloom and pandemic doom? Now over to Damien.
Hi there. I'm Damien Mellifont, and I'm a lived experience research fellow with the Centre for Disability Research and Policy. I've been with the CDRP since 2014, where a lot of my lived experience-led and co-produced research has been about addressing ableism and evidence-based ways of making places more inclusive of people with disability. It's great to have a virtual seat at the table today and to be given the opportunity to talk about the important topic of accessibility. My virtual attendance today is an example of an accommodation in action. It's also an example of there being different ways of doing things. Different, but not lesser than. So what has COVID meant for me in terms of accessibility? A COVID-inspired new normal has made a big impact on me in terms of my increased accessibility at the University of Sydney. Being based in the soon-to-be Olympic city of Brisbane, Zoom has allowed me to work 100% remotely through my virtual attendance at meetings. Zoom's also allowed me to access and enjoy conferences that would otherwise have been anxiety-producing if I had to attend these in person. Now, I can appreciate that the COVID-driven changes that have made university life more accessible for me, and also for many other neurodivergent people, is not enjoyed by all. By this, I mean that Zoom is not great for everyone. One of my colleagues with disability expressed a preference for face-to-face meetings. As for them, online meetings were described as a nightmare. This reminds me that when it comes to accessibility, it's critical to acknowledge and respect individual disability needs. As part of my introduction, I'll share a quick pre-COVID story about inaccessibility. Before I joined the University of Sydney, I spent some time looking for some policy work with the DES provider. I remember speaking to my case manager about a policy job that I was qualified for, and asked as to whether I would be allowed to do this role 100% remotely. My case manager said that they'd check this out with the government agency in question and would get back to me. The response was that I would have to do at least 2 days a week in the office, and the job couldn't possibly be done 100% remotely. In the narrow mind of the decision maker, no way was full-time remote work possible. Well, this was some years before COVID had arrived. But COVID did arrive, and guess what? This same job that I was so adamantly told couldn't possibly be performed remotely, along with millions of other jobs across various professions, were all conducted in this way during COVID lockdowns. And this way was remote working. And yes, the world kept turning. Even today, government departments tend to have policies in place which prefer that employees be physically present in the office. Now, this might be about economics, filling up empty government offices and seats at city cafes, or power with some managers who might experience a loss of ego and control when they can't manage or micromanage their staff in person. But what these kinds of ableist policies are not is about advancing disability inclusion and accessibility in the workplace. This lack of accessibility is serious, as it can be the difference between people with disability being employed or not. Anyway, with ongoing accessibility challenges in mind, it's good to be virtually here today to talk about ways of making places more inclusive for people with disability. Okay, first question. How can we make decisions when not everyone is in the room? Remote decision-making means that decisions can be made when not everyone is located in the same location. But there are some key accessibility challenges that will need to be met to allow for inclusive decision-making. For starters, consideration should be given to ensuring that differences in time zones don't deter some people with disability from remotely attending decision-making sessions. I mean, who seriously wants to be making decisions at 3 a.m. in the morning? Another thing is access to information that's required to inform decision-making. These details need to be forwarded along with a virtual decision-making meeting invite so that people who are in physical attendance do not have access to documents which are not shared with those who are attending online. Another thing, the documents that inform decisions need to be made in accessible formats. Also, appropriate time needs to be given for people with disability to thoroughly read materials and to critically consider their content. It's also important that all decision-related discussions are accessible for remote decision makers with disability. For example, some neurodivergent decision makers might prefer to write their comments in chat mode rather than saying these out aloud. These chat comments need to be carefully monitored so that they're not overlooked among the verbal communications that are happening. Care must also be taken so that people with disability who are accessing the decision-making meeting remotely and who have their hands virtually raised and are waiting patiently to have their turn to speak are not forgotten. Voices that are made in the decision-making room are no more important than the voices that are received from a remote location. The message that is communicated is the main thing, not the location from which the message originates from. Workplaces are challenged to invest in online communication platforms that are consistently accessible to the needs of remote decision makers with disability. This investment can help to have better decisions made that reflect the voices of more people with disability. Remember that the nothing about us without us disability inclusion mantra applies to accessibility and decision making as much as it does to anything else. Next question. What is the difference between Zoom gloom and pandemic doom? I mentioned in my introduction about how great Zoom has been for me in enabling me to work remotely at the university. But I recognise that for many people, there are experiences of accessibility challenges and technical glitches that happen at the worst possible time. Also, picking up on non-verbal cues that for some can be easy to detect in face-to-face interactions. For me, Zoom gloom differs from pandemic doom in that the latter is represented as being fatalistic and untreatable. After all, the definition of doom is to be confronted with an inescapable and ill-fated outcome. Pandemic doom is depressing in the sense that it's presented as a done deal. In contrast, Zoom gloom, while being very real for many people with disability, can be reduced in different ways. These ways include treating Zoom meetings like any other meeting by encouraging them to start and finish on time. Also, some neurodivergent people will suffer from Zoom fatigue if forced to leave their cameras on, as masking and maintaining eye contact can be exhausting exercises. The use of cameras should therefore always be optional. Further challenges can be experienced with people attempting to talk over each other. Online meeting chairs need to make sure that everyone gets a fair go to have their say, regardless of their communication style. It's also important to ensure that Zoom meetings are actually needed and that these are outcome-oriented. A word of caution, however, as noted in my introduction. For some people with disability, it needs to be appreciated that there are no easy remedies to Zoom gloom, with face-to-face interactions being preferred. This highlights the need to make accessibility decisions that meet the needs of individuals with disability. It's also important to realise that for many people with disability, Zoom does not only make business meetings accessible, Zoom can also make social gatherings accessible. Events like Friday Virtual Happy Hour can give colleagues an opportunity to get together and chat in accessible ways about the week's events and to celebrate wins together. These could be hybrid events where people with and without disability are given the option to attend in person or to tune in with their virtual attendants. The main thing is that different disability requirements are recognised and accessible options to actively participate in university life are provided.
Okay, that was Damien's pre-recorded video. Actually, I feel like he was there. I thought that was great. So thanks, Damien, if you're watching, or if you're watching later. Thanks for sending that through. Great video, and I think really relevant and important. And yeah, it is unfortunate that the world had to suffer an enormous pandemic. For these sort of improved accessibility tools to become mainstream. But it has always been that when workplaces, work environments, work cultures are made to be more accessible, are designed with improved accessibility, that everybody benefits from it, and workplaces benefit from it. And so I think that the points that Damien made, the key points that Damien made, I think are really good, and I'm going to use them as a sort of a personal checklist think it would have been nice for me to have had that level of specificity and sort of options or guidance to have to be a better chair during the earlier library disability inclusion action meetings. But I think, yeah, like many, where just the tools themselves are becoming more sophisticated. We're developing procedures and increasing awareness on how to use tools to their fullest extent to ensure that everybody has access to information and has a voice and a seat at the table. So that's really great. We've come to the end of the presentations. Thank you very much, Damien, and again, Niko and Rosie. Just really inspiring stuff. I'm enjoying it. I really am. Probably talking too much as a result. But we're going to move on now to the questions and answers, and the lovely Tess is going to use the questions and answers form to facilitate that. So again, feel free to have a chat, to chat something in the chat if you like. But if you do have a question, any question will do. I'd love to be able to talk about it a little bit further. We've got 11 minutes, so feel free to use the questions and answers function. Over to you, Tess.
Yeah, so if the panelists will just put their videos on so they're ready to answer the questions, that'd be lovely. Thanks for that. So we just have one question so far from Matteo. In a culture where performance, productivity and KPIs come into conflict, with an increasing understanding of how flexible ways of working gives people greater access to perform at their best when they otherwise wouldn't, how can we advocate for ourselves when the organisations we work and learn in may not be advocating for us sufficiently? How do we communicate to people who are managing us in these environments that we need flexibility when there is a bias from the part of the person who requires greater access as the person who is trying to accommodate them in a way that doesn't make us appear as people who simply can't contribute to the operation as much as our typical peers? Who'd like to take that?
I can speak to that. Thank you, Matteo. I'm with you. I'm with you 100%. What frustrates me is what I would call the arrogant ignorance of people without disability, many of whom decide what happens. And it's very difficult, really, to, as you say, to show, to explain what happens in this case. To my knowledge, and maybe Vicky can correct me, anybody with a disability similar to mine was removed from teaching this year. We cannot contribute, and we can contribute. That's the whole point. We're not unable to contribute. We need accommodation. The university states on their webpage clearly flexible workplace adjustments for people with disability. I have yet to see that happening within this context. I wouldn't start from a war. I wouldn't start from friction. Friction, can result in oppositional defiance, can make things worse. I will start from education. I would include, as needed, government directives. The Fair Work webpage has some idea about discrimination, because that's where we're getting to. There are some, the legal aid webpage has also some fact sheets and resources for this. I would try to create this dialogue in a constructive way, and only if it fails, I would move to more, radical approaches. But for disability, many times we don't have gray areas. We don't have this. The people who live with disability do not have a gray area to compromise. It's, I need this or I die. I'm sorry, there is no other. I cannot give in to some partial accommodation. How are we going to do that? I really don't know. I'm still trying and struggling. If I find a solution, you will see it on Sydney Morning Herald, maybe. That's what I can say about this.
And Rosie or Brett, did you want to make further comments?
Yeah, I can definitely add something. I guess, I mean, yeah. Look, I've been through some bad experiences in workplaces because people, I guess, are not willing to even be open to the possibility that they would have a disabled employee, which I think is really sad. But I guess, I think my approach to dealing with it, and this definitely wouldn't work for everybody, but my approach to dealing with it is to make people listen, because it might be a problem of awareness, in which case that's fine. They need to, we need to increase that awareness. But I think sometimes it gets to the point where you have to make people listen. And I guess that's kind of why I'm so passionate about lived experience and disability advocacy, because including lived experience in, things like workplace policies, in university policies, and actually listening to what disabled people have to say is a way that the perspective of other disabled people can become incorporated. But I think it's at the same time, it's obviously very difficult, and not everyone is able to, do that, or have anyone who can do that on their behalf even. And I think that's really sad and really awful and real. It's a shame. And I suppose that it really just shows that society still puts the onus on disabled people to, accommodate themselves. And it shouldn't be like that, because that's not making it accessible. Making things accessible is about accommodating us, not asking us to come up with accommodations, because putting the onus on us kind of ruins the whole point of accessibility. So it's very difficult, but my approach is to make people listen, but that's just my theory, I suppose. And yeah, the last thing I'll say, this is a quote from a poet of, not me, lol, but a poet that I really, really love, Blythe Bard. She said in one of her pieces, "I want to stand up, but if I do, what if everyone notices I've been sitting this whole time?" So I suppose I've stopped sitting and I'm ready to stand up for myself and other people. So make people listen.
That's great. And Brett, you want to say something?
Yeah, nice, Rosie. And I think you underestimate your charm as well. But I wanted to sort of fill in a gap. I don't want everybody to be left with the idea who's also sort of has these questions on their mind, that there are a last resort, and sometimes you have to force action. And I think it's really important to know that if you're in this country, there is a Disability Discrimination Act that is a requirement by law for companies to have to meet. And so HR have a responsibility to ensure that workplaces have an opportunity for people with disabilities to talk about any discrimination that they may be experiencing or perceiving, or opportunities for the company to improve their diversity and inclusion. And diversity and inclusion is not just about disabilities, and it's incredibly important, but I want to also empower everybody to have a sense that, and God, I hope this is not too privileged, because I don't get every job I apply for, trust me, but you have the power to not work at a particular place. No, there's very little barriers that are stopping you from leaving a place. Hopefully, in most normal circumstances, you can continue to apply for another role in a company or in a sector that are typically more supportive of diversity, and the libraries and the university sector are certainly one of them. There are challenges. Everything's better than it has been in the past, but there are still ongoing challenges. But so I want to also encourage people to seek out and look for signs of diversity. Look for people with different skin color. Look for people who are employed overseas, or look for people with disabilities in their websites and their marketing, and talk to people who work there. Ask them when you're applying for a job, what are their sort of levels of diversity? What opportunities do you have? And another thing that works really well is companies typically won't sign off early on things that they think are going to cost a lot of money and give very little benefit to the bottom line. So put together a group of champions and do sort of volunteer-based work, so nothing that impacts your own work, but look for ways to get together and talk about things that can be done easily and practically to make improvements, because nothing's going to go from being not good enough to then perfect without taking a number of steps along the way. So there are disability advocates. I don't think you should do it alone. If you feel alone, then I would encourage you to reach out. But HR have a responsibility in companies, and I would encourage that as well. Sorry, it's nearly 2 minutes to go. Thanks, everybody. We've got another question. Tess, did you want to?
Yep. So this one's from Gemma. How can disabled students and staff best work together in this space to improve conditions at UCID for both students and staff? Who'd like to give that a go? Rosie?
The only thing I can think of is work with Dawn. And Dawn can put some soft pressure, as I was told, to the university. I don't know if Rosie knows any other avenues for this communication.
I guess for students.
Sorry, Rosie.
Oh, sorry, Brett. I guess for students get involved in societies like DISCO, the Disability Disabled Students Collective, is really good, and it's also a really good way to meet other disabled people and hear about their experiences and how they've like the success that they've had going through other avenues. But it's hard and it's not. Yeah, I know, right? Thanks, Gemma. You really threw me under the bus with giving me this one. Sorry, I was just seeing what Gemma wrote in the chat. So I think like reaching out to, like as a student, reaching out to Supra as a postgrad or SRC or DISCO and connecting with people who might have had more success, because sometimes just knowing who to contact is the hard part, or knowing, say, which staff members are like more open to listening, or there might be some ableist staff members that you need to avoid, and that just happens, right? It's going to happen anywhere. And I think that connecting with other disabled people is a way to like find out those things. And yeah, it's becoming a bit of a thread, but yeah, that's all I'll say. Someone else had a question, but I will mute and let Tess.
Oh, I just also wanted to just very quickly, thanks, Rosie. I just also wanted to quickly encourage from the other perspective, so managers and employees of the University of Sydney in this case, every time you're making a change, an improvement, making plans to make some changes, make sure that you engage with all of your stakeholders and target diversity groups so that you get an understanding of how you can meet their needs in particular. So make those efforts to reach out rather than making the students come to you. Yes, we've got a question in the chat that Nikki Wedgwood has.
Yeah, there's a Q&A question, and then Nikki also has a question. So
should we bang on until the end of the questions, because it's after 12? We should just bang on.
You're happy to? Okay. So Claire's question in the Q&A, in teaching, where on campus presence is needed for the learning activity, for example, scientific practicals, how can we make these more accessible? Maybe this question can be addressed offline as we are out of time.
I don't have all the answers. Every change requires calibration, requires extra steps to, as you say, accommodate further needs that were previously either neglected or practiced partially, within the setting that existed. The point here is to start. Let's start, and once we start, and hopefully we have the will. Not we have the will. The people upstairs, have the will. Solutions will be found. We are an academic institution. We are the ones who create solutions regardless. They will be found. It's just, let's not say there is a barrier there. Oh, how do we do that? And we're not going to do anything. No. Let's try to find solutions, but we have to have the will. So I'm pretty sure there will be ways that we'll have smart people here on this university. But let's start at least. Let's start and not reject, you know?
Yeah, I like what you said there, Niko, in trying as well. So it's a sector-based problem, education-based problem around the world after the global pandemic. How do we effectively continue to teach when not everybody can get on site to do practicals? And I think that the changes are still underway. The pandemic was important for that. Sorry for everybody that suffered incredibly as a result of that. But one of the benefits afterwards that we should still hold on to and work towards is understanding, how we can make sure that everybody can participate, even if they can't get on site or to a particular location. Try and see how you go and make changes as you go, but it's an iterative process.
Yeah, and I'm happy I can add something to Claire's question from a student perspective, I suppose. Someone who did a science degree and I guess knows, you have to be in the lab when you have to be in the lab. I guess for me, I think the best thing that's helped is when staff don't try and stop you. Like I know, not all students have academic plans, not all students want to describe themselves as disabled. And it took me a really long time to, I guess, kind of wrap my head around that as someone, it's not a physical disability, it's not a disability you can see, it's not everyone wants to describe themselves as disabled. And I think that is important to acknowledge and understand. But the thing that helped me the most was when staff kind of didn't stop me from doing things that I needed to do, or asking me why I was doing certain things that maybe seemed a bit odd, but actually was me trying to manage my disabilities and how it affected me in class. Like, for example, I sometimes need to work alone, like if I am finding it really overwhelming. And I think that when staff forced me to work with other people, it made it a lot worse for me and it made it a lot more stressful. Whereas if they sort of either let me be or asked, I think that's more important actually. If they asked me, why I decided to be alone, and I would say, I'm just not up for it today, or it's a really overwhelming environment, I'm having like sensory overload, I just need to have my headphones in and do this alone. I think when staff asked me if that was, why I was doing that, or, if that was what I wanted to be doing, or if I needed help to work with other people or whatever it was, that made a really big difference to me, because once I acknowledged that, or once they sort of asked and understood that I was, dissecting whatever with my headphones in by myself, that I was still learning. It's not like I wasn't paying attention, that was just what I needed to do on that day at that time. And once they kind of understood that, I think that really helped. And I guess that goes a little bit to answering Nikki's question as well, that not everyone, the second point about not everyone wants to, disclose that they're disabled or describe themselves as disabled or ask for adjustments. So yeah, it is scary. I agree.
Did we have time to get to Nikki's 2 questions there, or do we think that kind of covered it?
I think Nikki had another question. What was number 1 there?
Should I just read them out quickly? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've had my hand up, but we'll ask question in chat instead. One is that I'm already hearing worrying stories about the policy for all teaching to go back to campus in SEM 2, from teachers with disabilities who are being forced back on campus even when they have med certificates to work from home. How we make sure this policy is not applied universally and in this process is disableist. I'll just add the second part just so we have it. Secondly, having to disclose a disability in order to get an adjustment is scary, dangerous for staff with a disability. If universal flexibility is offered to all staff, it would remove the need for staff with disabilities to disclose to their managers /HR and make themselves vulnerable to disableism or even medical retirement.
The first one is a really tough issue, and thanks to Nikki for asking us how we can make the university change their mind about. But it's certainly valid, and certainly I think the unions will take a role in advocating on behalf of teachers or academics and even students with a disability to maybe have a more flexible approach. Being a professional staff member and not academic, I can only just say that I understand, and I hope that with the ability to demonstrate results in keeping with what the graduate qualifications are, or qualities are, or you know, overall sort of feedback or just teaching outcomes from remote locations. So if we're able to demonstrate that there's no loss, then that might be that might make a difference. If there's some data around it, that always helps. Nice chart or something like that. And I think that there's probably got to be plenty of examples where remote teaching has been as effective as in-person teaching. Being a student myself, I remember 80% of the lectures that I attended were only attended by 3 or 4 other people in a 300 group strong subject, as opposed to the first one and the last one when they were typically full. And so I don't know, if students are happy to not attend classes in person, then maybe there's some flexibility there for teachers. And there are a lot of stories being. So what, Tess, do you have?
There's no more questions in the Q&A function.
Oh, great, excellent. Do you have any more questions in the chat? We'll just make sure the chat's available. Oh, the chat will be available in the recording. Will it, Curtis?
It should be, yes. There is something here I can relate regarding hybrid teaching, as I'm part of the National Student Campaign with the NUS and Kappa. The face-to-face teaching policy is being applied because of the, I don't know what this acronym is. Yeah, there we go. Requirements for international students. However, we have it in writing, and Jason Clare, that this is up to individual universities if they provide flexible options for disability students and carers. That's just a comment.
Yep, great. Yeah, thanks very much, Gemma. Okay, so I think without any more questions to answer, I want to just again thank Rosie and thank Nick, and thank you, William, Tess and Curtis, for your excellent work for being able to make this happen. And I hope that a lot more people will get to see this than those who were in attendance today. But thank you to everybody who attended and engaged with questions and chats. Have a nice rest of the day. See ya.